They loved each other, then lost each other for 33 years. They met again on a train.
Before we begin, tell us where you're from. I hope you enjoy this amazing story.
It had been 33 years since Margaret last set foot in England. The station at York was almost unrecognizable, yet something in the air still whispered the same sadness. The quiet chill of mist against metal, the shuffle of shoes on old stone floors, and the way strangers avoided each other's eyes. She stood near the edge of the platform, her fingers wrapped tightly around the worn leather handle of a suitcase older than most of the people rushing past her. Her eyes traced the horizon, not searching for anything specific, just lingering, as if watching long enough might stir some forgotten truth out of the fog. Margaret was alone, recently divorced. Her children, now grown with their own lives, had gently encouraged this trip. A break, they said, a reset. But she knew better. This wasn't about starting fresh. This was about standing still enough to understand the silence that had settled inside her. Her life hadn't been bad, just unlived in the ways that mattered. She had loved, yes. She had worked, raised children, paid bills, planned holidays. But the kind of love that burns quietly, the kind that lingers even after the photos fade, that had only happened once, and she had lost it long ago. On the other side of the platform, Thomas adjusted the strap of his coat and checked his watch, even though he already knew the time. He did it out of habit, one of many habits that had taken the place of feelings over the years. Thomas looked composed, perhaps even content, but inside he was tired. He had been widowed once, divorced once. Both relationships had left him more reflective than bitter. He didn't blame anyone anymore, not them, not himself. But he did wonder, more and more often these days, if the best part of his story had ended before it ever truly began. And that part, that chapter, had a name: Margaret. She had vanished from his life on a rainy afternoon in Boston 33 years ago after a shouting match outside a train station. Neither of them had gone after the other. Neither had called. And after a while, the silence between them had grown so large it became impossible to cross. He didn't expect to think of her on this trip, but when he passed a bookshop earlier that morning and saw a first edition of Wuthering Heights in the window, her voice echoed in his head, reading the first lines aloud in that soft, deliberate way she used to. That's when it started, the flood. Thomas boarded the train just before departure. He walked slowly through the carriage, looking for seat 12B, unaware of what or who waited just a few rows ahead. Margaret had already taken her seat. She sat by the window, her coat neatly folded over her lap, a small notebook resting beside it like a sleeping pet. The countryside beyond the glass rolled by in shades of foggy green, but her gaze was somewhere far beyond the present. When Thomas reached her row, he saw only the back of her head, but something inside him stirred, a strange recognition he couldn't place. He hesitated, stepped forward, and then as she turned slightly to look out the opposite window, their eyes met. His breath caught. So did hers. For a moment, time seemed to distort, not rewind, not pause, but fold in on itself, as if the decades between them collapsed into a single shared breath. "Margaret?" he asked, raw, uncertain. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes, wide and wet, searched his face like it was a half-remembered dream. Then a single nod. "Yes, Thomas." He stood frozen for a moment. The train jolted slightly as it began to move, and that broke the spell just enough for him to slide into the seat across from hers. They stared at each other, both smiling, but guarded, both flooded with too many thoughts and too little language. "I almost didn't come," she said quietly. "Same here," he replied. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "You look good." He smiled. "So do you, just a little older." She laughed, a soft, breathy thing that made his chest ache. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she whispered. "Neither did I, but here we are." The train picked up speed, and the silence between them turned from awkward to familiar, like an old room that hadn't been entered in years, but still held the scent of something sacred. "You heard you moved to California," she said quietly. "I did, for a while. Then Maine, and now I'm mostly just in between." "I never left Connecticut. Everything I needed was there, or so I thought." There was so much more to say, so many questions neither of them had the right to ask, yet both needed answered. Why didn't you call me? Why did we give up so easily? Did you ever stop loving me? But none of that was said. Not yet. The air between them was still too fragile. Instead, they talked about the train, the soft seats, the odd way British coffee tasted, the weather. Outside, the countryside rolled on, hills draped in fog and time. Inside, two people sat face to face with a version of themselves they thought had been left behind. Thomas shifted in his seat. "Do you remember that little cafe in Bristol where we got stuck during the storm?" She smiled instantly. "You were terrified of the lightning." "I was terrified of how much I loved you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Margaret blinked, startled by their honesty, but she didn't retreat. "Then why didn't you fight for me?" That question hovered in the air like a thread waiting to be pulled. "I don't know," he said after a long pause. "I was young, proud, stubborn. I thought, if you wanted me, you'd come after me too." She nodded slowly. "I waited for days. Then I decided waiting was another way of breaking my own heart." They looked out the window in silence. The train rumbled on. "I almost married someone else that winter," she confessed. "But I couldn't. It always felt like betrayal." "I did marry someone else, and I was good to her. But she always knew there was someone I never stopped thinking about." Margaret's eyes brimmed. "I carried you through every year I pretended to be okay." Thomas reached across the table, slowly, deliberately. His hand hovered for a second, unsure. Then she placed hers on top of it. The train curved around a hill, and the light shifted just enough for both of them to see what they hadn't dared to believe for 30 years, that some feelings don't fade, they wait. The train continued its gentle hum along the tracks, slicing through the countryside like a soft thread through old fabric. Inside the carriage, Margaret and Thomas sat in silence, not awkward, but dense, like a room holding its breath. He still held her hand. She hadn't pulled away. Her fingers were thinner now, more delicate, but the touch still sparked something familiar, something that had lived dormant just beneath their skins for years. "I always thought if I ever saw you again, I'd have so much to say, she whispered. And now? He asked. She smiled gently. Now I'm afraid to say the wrong thing. Thomas looked down at their joined hands. I think after this much time, there's no wrong thing, only the honest ones. That made her heart flutter, but not like when she was 22. It was deeper now, like a resonance through old wood, warm, aching, solid. I kept waiting for a letter, just one, even a postcard. I wrote one. I carried it around for weeks. Never sent it. She turned to him, her eyes wet. Why not? I think I was afraid you'd already let go, and I wasn't brave enough to find out. The countryside blurred by. Cottages, sheep, wildflowers. You were always the braver one, she murmured. Thomas laughed under his breath. God help us if that's true. They paused as the train slowed near a small station, a name neither of them recognized. Passengers came and went, but the carriage never felt more still than it did in that moment. I kept your letters, she said, her voice thin. He blinked. What letters? The ones you sent me during college, the ones before we fell apart. He tilted his head. I didn't think you'd even read them. I read them every year on my birthday, even after I married someone else. His throat tightened. I had no idea. She nodded, slowly. That's the saddest part of all, I think. They looked at each other, two strangers carrying the same memory, shaped by silence into different truths. Do you remember our spot? She asked, suddenly. In the woods? Yes, that crooked tree and the bench with the initials carved in. I carved those. You didn't believe me back then. I didn't want to believe you could feel something that deep. It scared me. It scared me too, he admitted. The train entered a long tunnel, and the light inside the carriage changed, dimmer, golden, more intimate. I used to dream you'd walk into the bookstore where I worked. Just show up. Ask for a second chance. I came once, he said. She turned to him. I stood across the street, watched you through the window. Why didn't you come in? You were laughing with someone. I assumed you were happy. Her eyes widened. That was my coworker, Greg. He was gay. I was miserable that day. Thomas closed his eyes. I walked away thinking it was the right thing to do. You seemed okay. I didn't want to reopen old wounds. And I thought you'd forgotten me, so I built a life around the absence of you. He reached for his cup of tea. His hand trembled slightly. I was a coward, Margaret. She shook her head. We both were. The silence between them changed again, no longer hollow. It was heavier now, filled with the ache of missed chances and the strange comfort of being seen again after so long. The conductor passed through the aisle, nodding politely. They barely noticed. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you love her? She knew who she meant. Yes, he said honestly, but not like you. Never like you. She nodded, tears slipping down silently. I tried to love him too, my ex, but he always felt like Chapter 2. They both laughed, softly, painfully. Chapter 1 never got an ending. Until now? I don't know. Maybe we're still writing it. The train moved through rolling fields, like time rolling itself out again. They started talking about the years in between, not in detail, but in moments. Lost parents, grown children, illnesses, laughter, vacations, holidays spent pretending to be happy. And slowly something began to thaw. Their voices found rhythm, their laughter found memory, their hearts found breath. "I kept your necklace, the tiny one with the sea glass," she gasped. "You still have it?" He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was the necklace, worn, beautiful, timeless. "I kept it in my desk all these years." She reached out, her fingers grazing it. "You wore this the night we danced in the rain." "I did," he smiled, "and you kissed me like the world had stopped." "It had," she whispered.
They walked slowly through the train, two older souls moving through a space built for the young, but owning it completely. They found a table by the window, the light hitting her face just right. "Red wine?" he asked. She nodded. "Please." They toasted without words. Halfway through the glass, she said, "This doesn't feel real." "It's real. It's the first thing that's felt real in a very long time." Their knees brushed under the table. Neither moved. He reached into his coat again, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I did keep one letter, the one I never sent." Her breath caught. "Read it," she said. He unfolded the paper. His hands trembled. His voice cracked. "Dear Margaret, I'm sorry I was afraid. I'm sorry I let silence take your place in my life. You were never a mistake. You were always the one thing I knew how to feel. I hope wherever you are, you kept the little piece of us." When he looked up, she was crying. "I kept all of us. Every piece." They didn't speak after that for a long while. But something had changed. Something had shifted. Not in the train. In them. They returned to their seats as the sky began to darken. She leaned her head gently on his shoulder. He didn't move. He just let her be there. "Do you think we're foolish?" "No. I think we're brave. I forgot how your voice felt. It never forgot you." She laughed tiredly, sweetly. The rhythm of the train seemed to sync with their hearts. "Do you think it's too late?" "No. I think we're right on time." She looked at him again, studied the lines of his face, the eyes she once memorized. And she saw it, not the man she once loved, but the man she still did. And for the first time in decades, the ache inside her chest began to ease. Not because everything was healed, but because something had been reopened, gently, carefully. A door, a window, a possibility. And outside, the train rolled on, into night, into memory, into something very much like a second chance.
The train slowed as it approached its final stop, a small station tucked at the edge of the Cotswolds, quiet and sleepy, like a place untouched by urgency. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving behind streaks of orange and lavender across the sky. Inside the carriage, the soft light fell over Margaret's face, her eyes closed, her head resting gently on Thomas's shoulder. He hadn't moved in a long while, just sat there, breathing her in, the quiet of her, the calm, the weightless presence of something he thought he'd lost for good. "I don't want to get off," she murmured without opening her eyes.
He smiled. Then don't. But trains stop, she said softly. They always do. Maybe not all of them. Maybe some just change direction. She lifted her head slowly, looking at him with something between fear and hope. What are you saying? I don't know. I don't want this to end here. A soft chime rang overhead. Final stop in 10 minutes, the conductor announced. Margaret looked down at her hands. They were trembling. I didn't come here expecting this, Thomas. I know, neither did I. But what now? We go home? Say goodbye? Pretend this didn't happen? He shook his head. No, we don't pretend. Not again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he added, Would you stay a few more days with me in the village? She looked up sharply. I booked a cottage just for myself, but now I can't imagine sitting in that quiet alone again. Not after this. Her eyes welled up. Are we really doing this? I think we already are. Outside, the train rolled slowly past fields now painted blue by twilight. The sound of the tracks softened like a heartbeat calming down after a long run. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a postcard. It was blank on the back, but the picture on the front showed a single chair facing the sea. I bought this before the trip, thought I'd send it to myself as a reminder that I was still capable of doing something bold. She handed it to him. I don't need it anymore. He turned the card in his hands, then tucked it gently into his coat pocket, next to the letter he'd carried for 30 decades. The small car waited for them. The rental Thomas had arranged days earlier, before he ever imagined he'd be sharing it. They drove in silence for a while, the road curving through hills and trees, the sky folding into stars. Finally, he said, You can take the bed. I'll sleep on the couch. She shook her head. We're not strangers anymore. The cottage was simple. Stone walls, fireplace, wooden floors that creaked like they held old secrets. Margaret stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, letting it settle around her. It's beautiful, she said. It's yours for as long as you want it. Later, wrapped in an oversized sweater, Margaret sat on the small patio with a glass of wine. Thomas joined her, carrying a blanket they now shared. They didn't talk much that night. The silence between them was no longer something to break, it was something to rest inside. I feel like I'm 20 again, she whispered. I feel like I'm finally 67, whole, seen, enough. She turned to him. I'm afraid of losing this again. He nodded. So am I. Then promise me something. Anything. Don't disappear. I won't. Don't run. I've done enough running. She smiled, her eyes shining. Then stay. The next morning, the world looked different. The light was golden, the birds louder, the coffee warmer. Margaret woke to the sound of Thomas humming in the kitchen, an old song from a record they once danced to in a dorm room. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him, tears pooling gently. He turned, saw her, smiled. Good morning, he said. It really is, she answered. Days passed, slowly, beautifully. They walked, cooked, remembered, forgot what loneliness used to feel like. No grand declarations, just moments. Fingers brushing in the hallway, laughter over tea, a shared glance that said, We're still here. And one evening, as the sky bled into lavender again, Thomas turned to her and said, I don't want this to be temporary. She nodded. Neither do I. And so, on a platform far from where it all began, two people who thought their story had ended wrote a new beginning.
I hope you enjoyed Thomas and Margaret's story. Please tell us from 0 to 10 how you rate it. Subscribe to find out when we release new stories. Click the like button and share with anyone you think will also enjoy our channel. See you next time.